Tenderloin, now on BBC Radio Scotland. Jim Spence discovers how a man called David Jones helped create an industry in the Spielberg of Gaming.
There was a time when Dundee was famed for its 3 Js, jute, jam and journalism. Sadly, the jute mills are long gone, but in their place another industry has developed, another J to take its place: joysticks. In 2009, for the first time, more money was spent on computer games than on film. Computer games are now the 3rd biggest media industry in the UK, beaten only by TV and music. Gaming is big business, and Dundee is the centre of the UK's industry. I'm Jim Spence, and I'm here in the City of Discovery to tell you the story of how the gaming industry in Dundee got to where it is. It's a story that goes all the way back to the 80s and to one man, the man Nintendo once called the Spielberg of Gaming. In 1983, computer games were in their infancy. The arcades were full of Pac-Man and Space Invaders, but very few people actually had a home computer. That was about to change though, thanks to Clive Sinclair. His ZX81 and ZX Spectrum computers were manufactured here in Dundee at the Timex factory in Harrison Road. The factory would later be witness to some of the worst picket line violence the city had seen, but in the early 80s it was the first port of call for many of Dundee's school leavers, including a young chap called David Jones.
I was offered an apprenticeship at Timex, which was really good, so I went straight from school to there. I went there to become basically an electronics engineer, so it was actually a proper apprenticeship as they had in those days. So the first year was actually 1 year full-time at college, which they paid for, and then about 2 years on the job training. Stayed at Timex for about 4 years, got my qualifications, became an electronics engineer, and at that point things started to wind down a fair bit in Dundee, and I think about 1986, so I took redundancy after being there for about 4 years. If I remember correctly, I think the redundancy package was about £2,600. I spent the majority of it on a brand new computer from the US that wasn't even available here, called the Commodore Amiga. Still living with my parents at that time, yes, still, doing all my work out in my bedroom. I don't think, A, they were very happy that, I took redundancy, and then B, to go and spend the money, on a computer as well. It certainly tested their patience. After I took the redundancy, I had a plan. I really enjoyed the software side rather than the hardware side I'd gone into and been trained in. So I thought what I'd do is I'd go back to, training effectively, and I go back to university and actually do a software degree.
With anyone who makes an impact in an industry, you always look back for that decision that changed their life, that set them on their path. And David's decision to blow his redundancy on a state-of-the-art computer and head to university can certainly be looked on as one of those decisions. It was while at university he took another major step. All it took was to walk through the doors of the local computer club. It was here he would meet Mike Daly, Russell Kay and Steve Hammond.
Now, the Kingsway Amateur Computer Club, that's where it all started. I think this would have been around about 1984. It had been on the go before that, but myself and another one of my friends, Mike Daly, turned up with our Commodore 64s and our Spectrums.
The computer club was up at the Kingsway Tech, which is just off the Kingsway, which is the motorway that goes around Dundee, so it's just off the main road. I was 14 at the time, and I had a little black and white portable. So you'd lug this portable and all your gear in this big bag up to this computer club on a bus. And it was quite far from me at that point, so it was interesting, but well worth it as it turns out.
Took along my Amiga, which was one of the first ones there, so that was always great, and a Spectrum, and just whatever work I'd been working on the previous week. I never really had an ambition to try and make something I could sell. At that point, I don't think people saw making games as anything you could actually make a living from.
Well, you always think you want a career in writing games, but you never think it was going to happen. Even now, with it being mainstream, you'd be lucky to get into the computer industry. Back then, when it was folk in a bedroom doing weird stuff, you dream about it, but you never think it's actually going to happen.
My parents, they weren't actually too much bothered because they thought that I would never turn into a real job. but it was just some fun. But because I'd never stopped talking about going to university, and they were quite happy I was going to get a degree, and this seemed to be all heading towards that.
In the mid-80s, I don't think there would be many young Dundonians who thought they could carve a career in what was basically their hobby. But as the games they were programming were becoming more and more sophisticated, it was David Jones who took the jump and tried to get a game published. It was originally called Draconia, but would eventually become his first ever game, Menace.
I'd spent about a year. I practically finished this game, and I thought it was pretty good. So I thought, what I'll do is I'll take it down to one of the computer shows. There's actually computer shows now, every year, personal computer world shows, those kind of things. So I took it down, and I basically went around the show, with my demo disc, and I showed it to a few publishers, and the reaction, from the publishers was pretty good. I eventually settled on a publisher called Psygnosis. Mainly because they were the closest. They were in Liverpool, which is the closest to Scotland I could get in terms of a publisher. I did another game after that in second year called Blood Money, which is kind of like a follow-up really, and that went on sale as well. And so at the end of the second year, going into third year, I had 2 games out. I was thinking about a third. I was managing friends who were doing other versions, and at that point, and the third year of a degree course was getting kind of tough, so I knew one of them had to give.
With 2 games under his belt and a successful relationship with his publisher, David suddenly had too much work on and found himself increasingly looking to his friends Russell Kay, Mike Daly and Steve Hammond to help out. And as with many programmers of the time, their first office in Roddy Ferry was exactly where you'd expect it. Here's Mike Daly.
The first office was Russell's bedroom. I used to cycle down from Adler, which was a good 3 or 4 miles away.
This was down at Broughty Ferry someplace. Someplace vague. I got driven there, I couldn't tell you where it was.
And we set up all the gear in his bedroom, and there was 3 of us in there.
We had makeshift desks from the top of a chest of drawers through to a chunk of wood stuck in the top of a drawer with an old black and white telly stuck on top.
So we had all these big machines now in this little bedroom, and you could tell this isn't working, it's just not. I'm surprised we didn't take over the living room. I suspect Russell's mum and dad just wouldn't have let us.
So they needed a new office, and it was here at 134B Nethergate that David rented. And 20 years ago, this would have been a radically different area. When Dundee was still a thriving, working industrial city, the jute mills were just about dying out, but lots of working people in this area. To my left, Groucho's Disc and Tape and CD Exchange, ticket agency, also known to generations of Dundonians too. And now, of course, where it all started for David Jones, it's now the Malay Thai restaurant. And with an office, of course, he decided to take on his first employee, and in the process risked the wrath of his friend's mum.
I left, as I said, when I was going into my third year, and thought, well, I'm going to go do this set-up company up, and so I took on a very, very small office in Dundee, just a couple of small rooms, and employed the chap Mike Daly I mentioned I'd met, been working with at the computer club, and effectively had 1 employee.
I left school after 6th year, and I went to what Abertay was before, and I went on an HNC in computing, and then got booted out at Christmas because I was never there, basically, because the course sucked. Yeah, my mum wasn't happy, it has to be said. She, because I kind of sat about after being kicked out for about 3 months, and then she started pushing me to various interviews for B&Q, or I think it was Texas Home Care was the interview I had. It was my only interview I've ever had. Not long after that, David announced he was going to be getting an office and would have wanted a job there, so I was like, yes, of course.
Company at that point, yes, was called DMSO. It went through a few names. Initially it was called Acme.
Because Acme means the pinnacle of perfection, and he quite liked that. Then he discovered somebody else had the name, so he tried to think for ages on the name. I think he just got fed up and then picked DMA out of the Amiga hardware manual. In Amiga hardware terms, DMA is a direct memory access. It's a bit of hardware that does something, and he just thought it sounded cool, so put DMA design.
Well, up a flight of stairs here, and I have to say at the moment it's pretty unprepossessing. I know the owner intends to turn this into another part of the restaurant, but this is where David Jones and the guys kicked off what has become an international phenomenon. Into the wee office into the left here. It's just a tiny, small office. It's about maybe 15 feet by 10 feet. It really is quite astonishing. This wonderful view over the Nethergate here at the start of Dundee's cultural quarter, and this is where it all started. It was here that they released their first game of the 90s, a game that would be not only symbolic of their innovation, but would put them firmly on the gaming map. Here's Russell Kay.
I'd be at university, which is actually just up the road, and at lunchtimes I'd come down and talk to the guys, have lunch, etc. And we used to have little competitions, and one of them was to do with how many sprites could we actually get on the screen. And Mike and I picked up that particular challenge, and he designed an animation with lots of characters on screen, and I did some programming to actually show that we could actually do it.
And he just drawn these little characters who were walking up this little cliff face, and at the top they got blasted, and he had this little cycling animation where he had, you know, lots of these little characters all just doing the same thing. And I just looked at it and thought, there's a little game idea in that.
When you look at Mike's animation, it's all about little characters getting killed in horrible ways, and one of the things was actually them falling off a cliff, and the name Lemmings just kind of fell out from that, of Lemmings falling off a cliff. I know it's apocryphal, I know they don't do it, but that's where the name came from.
Well, I made effectively like a little sampler version, and took that down to Psygnosis and said, you know, I've got this new idea I'm working on, I've put together this little demonstration. And I remember I left it with a bunch of the artists and the programmers down there and went to lunch with the MD. And when we came back, it was on every single machine, everybody was playing it. At that point I thought, you know, I could see people laughing and really enjoying it, so I thought, well, this looks like it could be a winner.
I think we realised that within a month or two of working on it, that we had something really special here. It's one of the original open world games. You can do anything within the constraints of the game, which is really Dave's signature.
The day it was released, you know, I remember it vividly. You know, it was we'd had a great demo that had gone out and had, you know, tremendous, you know, reception, and people were very, very eager for it. And then effectively, I remember Ian Hetherington, the MD at Psygnosis, he basically phoned me up every hour with an update.
It was just going like hotcakes. Dave's previous games had sold 20,000 and 40,000, and that was pretty good for the day. You know, that would kind of keep you going. Whereas Lemmings was selling 60,000 on the first day, so it was huge. So it was obvious pretty quick that it was going to make quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it reviewed extremely well. I mean, we did have quite a few, you know, 100% reviews, and people absolutely loved it. It got us actually international recognition.
Shortly after it was launched, in the Christmas after it had launched, a whole lot of us went out to CES in Las Vegas, but we wandered around America and going into all the shops, going, that's our game, that's our game, we made that. And people in America were loving what we were actually doing as well. So many people came up to us in CES, amazed that the guys who'd written Lemmings were actually there and things like that. And also that we came from Scotland.
We were obviously really keen to do a sequel to Lemmings, but we did data discs first, which is just expansion packs for it. We did that pretty quickly. As Dave thought about Lemmings 2.
Definitely by the end of Lemmings 2, I was very glad to see the back of Lemmings. From a personal point of view, I remember I used to go to sleep at night, and the last image that I saw as I fell asleep, I would dream of Lemmings walking across it and doing different things, and I just got a bit mad by the end of it.
The company had grown by this point, so although we were doing Lemmings, we actually had other teams as well, so we were trying out things with other products as well. But I will say that after Lemmings 3, we didn't actually do another one, because at that point I actually felt it's hard now to keep coming up with, you know, fresh ideas, you know, for what we can do with the Lemmings. So basically we took a break and, you know, and focused on other things.
Since the first release, Lemmings has sold over 20 million copies and has been released on over 20 different formats. Not bad for a little company from Dundee. DMA, focusing on other things, would also coincide with Russell Kay leaving the company to set up on his own. Visual Sciences joined the growing list of games companies in Dundee, and would go on to considerable success working on both the official Formula 1 and Harry Potter games. DMA, meanwhile, were set to be courted by one of the biggest companies in the industry and would see the greatest games maker of them all visiting Tayside.
It's me, Mario!
In the mid-90s, there were few bigger than Nintendo. And after the success of Lemmings, there was only one game designer they wanted to sign up to provide games for the new console, David Jones. And it was while announcing the deal between the two companies, Nintendo of America's CEO, Howard Lincoln, made his famous comment.
Was this the Steven Spielberg thing, was it? Yeah, we just laughed at him. I don't think he took it too seriously either, but he got ribbed a bit for that. Dave's got a very good imagination for games and can pick up good ideas. I'm not quite sure there's anybody in the games industry that could quite be a Steven Spielberg of the games, though. Not yet, anyway.
Nintendo signed up with us after Lemmings 3, so they approached us to say they had a new machine coming out, and they'd followed our work keenly, and would we be interested in working with them on some software for their new machine. I mean, Nintendo were the kind of company you learned an awful lot from. They had Shigeru Miyamoto, who's considered the best game designer ever in the world. So having just the opportunity to meet him and work with him a little bit and learn, was tremendous. He visited us in Dundee, so he's been to Dundee a couple of times, and he was a big fan of Lemmings and some of the other games. So he I wouldn't say he's massively aware, but we certainly became friends, and and he visited Dundee a few times. Nintendo asked us to do two games, one called Body Harvest, which is kind of like a futuristic alien invasion, coming to Earth kind of game, and one called Space Station Silicon Valley, which was once again what was typically like a DMA game. We always try to do things a bit different and off the wall, so it's actually very hard to describe what kind of game that was. Yeah, Body Harvest was the one that they spent a lot of time on, saying, we wanted to get this, to work as much as possible in Japan and in the US. So there was a lot of design input from Nintendo into the game.
We kind of felt it from the outside of the team because the game was dragging on forever. But the changes Nintendo asked for, you could see the team kind of getting annoyed with it. It kept changing. It seemed to make no real progress to things. They just couldn't make up their mind what they wanted the games to be.
Well, Body Harvest. Body Harvest, I think, was actually quite a low point. Nintendo, being Nintendo, they had different ideas of what was going to go on. And I kept on doing the story and modifying the story, and it was a time travel story. And being a science fiction fan, I was aware, well, time travel, going back in time, paradoxes. I suggested several things to avoid that, and Nintendo of Japan came back saying, well, that's a bit too complex, could you simplify it? Well, okay, fair enough, could you simplify it again? I simplified it. Nintendo of America came back saying, could you beef it up a bit? And that was Body Harvest. It started out as a very different idea to where it ended up. The classic Nintendo moment, which I think has been repeated a number of times on the internet, is over the graphics for Body Harvest. Nintendo said, could you make them more material? And nobody knew what that meant.
That was Steve Hammond. Body Harvest was eventually released in 1998, not by Nintendo, who'd since given up the rights to the game, but by Gremlin Interactive, who'd merged with DMA during the process. It had definitely been a low point for David. Commercially, the game didn't do as well as hoped. But what is true is that it was still symbolic of what people expected from a DMA game. One reviewer claimed, it plays like an absolute dream and is filled with wonderfully innovative ideas. 5 stars. So, while not setting the heather on fire, the game still displayed all the signs that you would expect from a David Jones game. Here's Mike Daly, Russell Kay and Steve Hammond.
Dave's definitely got a way of viewing games and what would be fun that other people don't. That's his gift in terms of actually making games. His programming ability may have been questionable, but his design of games has always been really just one of the best, and that's what's driven him.
I think Dave is very much able to take A and B and jump to Z. And it's that ability to have 2 and 2 and make something more from it. It's not just 4; you can get a 5 or a 6 or a 7, and I think that's the essence that he brings to the process of making games.
As a boss, Dave was just so relaxed. It was such a relaxed working environment. It was very informal. He once took us all out for ice cream. It was a fantastic way of working. You felt you could do anything, you could say anything. You wouldn't get knocked back. Everything would be taken seriously.
Throughout the production of Body Harvest and the discussions with Nintendo, another game was slowly being developed at DMA. A game that would become bigger than Lemmings. A game that would lead one commentator to say it had done for the gaming industry in Dundee what the Beatles did for Liverpool. A game people still affectionately call GTA.
Grand Theft Auto.
In mid-94, I started playing with various ideas, and Dave decided to kick a team off with one of the prototypes that had done. So they started making a game based on this top-down city, and it gave a lot more freedom to the world. Dave, I think because of Lemmings, Dave was really interested in this kind of open experience of a game. So Lemmings, good thing about Lemmings is you make a basic level and there's just mountains of ways you can complete it. It's not a fixed thing. And he's been hooked on that ever since.
The initial thought was really basically a top-down game driving around the city, but trying to make the city as large and as alive as possible. And initially, we actually had it so you could play both the police, or kind of like cops and robbers game. And that's really what the premise started off as. You could go and make this really very fast top-down 3D driving game. That's based in this real living city. As
it progressed, it became really obvious that nobody wanted to play the police. It just wasn't fun. You just wanted to go around breaking things and stealing things. It was just... So it just evolved into what it became.
BMG, they knew we had a good fun game. We just need to get people to know about it and overlook the fact that it was effectively a top-down 2D game more than anything else. So we knew the game was a lot of fun, and it was then, like anything, how do we market this thing? How do we get people to hear about it? And being from the music industry, they were quite used to, controversy and etc. So they actually said, because of the content of this game, we can probably actually stir up a bit of press about this. And so they made the smart decision of hiring Max Clifford. What impressed me when I met him, and he looked at it all, and I think he was a wee bit disappointed because obviously when you hear about all the terrible things, but in reality when you see this top-down cartoony game, you're like, But I have to say what he did say was, this is what would happen. This would be the messaging he would put out about the game, and this is where the uproar and the backlash would come from, and this is what it will lead to, and this is where it will appear, and this is the TV that you'll be on. And he planned all that out over the space of like 60 days, and everything he said came true.
So I put most of the PR right down to Matt Clifford and doing his job. Back then, they were just a little blob of coloured pixels. You couldn't make out anything, and yet they were debating on this murder simulator. It was ridiculous.
If you're a parent, there are some other things that you should know that should send shivers down your spine if you hear these 3 words: Grand Theft Auto.
Welcome to the jungle. We got fun and games.
About 80% of the people in America that hear me go, oh, geez, here's a crazy conservative on TV screaming about the dangers of video games. Grand Theft Auto was originally released back in 1997. The first 3 versions of the game have sold over 70 million copies.
You've got to remember, as game designers, we start off with an idea and basically we try things out and we say, wouldn't it be fun if, wouldn't it be fun if, and it's, it's an evolutionary process. So, and when we were driving around, wouldn't it be great if, you could just get out of this car and there's another car you saw you liked, just for example, steal it. So we tried that, and then it was like, and wouldn't it be great if, for a laugh, you could run over the pedestrians on the side streets? Like, yep, so we added that, and that was fun.
As he makes his getaway, Nico can carjack the ride of his choice and drive down a sidewalk, mowing down as many pedestrians as he like.
Wouldn't it be cool if you ran over a pedestrian on the side street, and then ambulances came and actually picked up the bodies? So, yeah, that would be really cool. So we added that, and then it's like, but then you could steal the ambulance. And I was like, yeah, that would be cool. But then the police could come out, and it was just, and people just having fun, trying things out, and adding really all the things they felt would be fun.
This is entertainment? Whatever happened to Pong?
I found it hysterically funny, actually, that you get all these MPs in the House of Commons debating this game when you look at it, it's less violent than something like Tom and Jerry. It's ridiculous, but they'd never seen it. They just heard about it. They jump on their bandwagon and off they go.
You know, I remember waking up one morning. It was on, GMTV or Breakfast TV, whatever it was, for 2 hours solid. People debating whether games like this should be allowed.
Just like after Lemmings, Grand Theft Auto was such a success that they immediately set to work on the sequel. It was after Grand Theft Auto 2 that David Jones decided it was time to leave the company he'd set up and take a break. It was the turn of the millennium. 25% of all games sold that year had come from Dundee. But perhaps more significant than that, after a few years' discussions with the various gaming companies in the city, Abertay University also launched the world's first ever degree in games design, cementing Dundee's place as the centre of the industry in the UK and giving the city's future programmers every chance of success. Here's Russell Kay.
In the early 90s, we realised that if the games business was going the way that it was, which was larger games, larger development teams, that we were going to have to persuade universities that what they actually needed to do was to have some dedicated computer games course. Abertay were very receptive, and with a lot of discussion, the games course came to fruition.
They've been very supportive, and we've obviously employed a lot of graduates, and what they've done is really try to tailor and have very specific courses to what is it's a thriving industry. So they've been very good at moving with the times and helping us with that.
You actually find that there's quite solidarity amongst all the Dundee Games companies, and that's one of the reasons that the strategy of the university works quite nicely for us, because they come to the university and then stay here.
I think because it's been 20 years now, we have such a good community of people, friends, contacts, colleagues. I mean, it's a great place because it has matured and fostered over the last 20 years. So it's a very, very good place. At the same time, it's always challenging to get people to relocate here, so that's always an issue. So, but I have to say, when we bring people from abroad, they love the opportunity to come to Scotland for a few years and, work on these kind of exciting projects.
And what about the last 10 years? Well, the industry has gone from strength to strength, with over 50 companies in Scotland, most of which are in Tayside. And what about David Jones? Well, he couldn't stay out of the industry for long. In 2002, he set up a new company in Dundee, Real Time Worlds, based rather aptly in an old jute mill just down from their old office in the Nethergate. They already have one award-winning game under their belt, and this year they're set to release All Points Bulletin, one of the most hotly anticipated games of 2010, and a game that will confirm what Nintendo said 15 years ago, that David Jones is indeed the Spielberg of gaming.